friends and family just get tired of hearing you talk about like forever chemicals and like things that are going to ruin the environment or possibly cause, health damage? They get sick and tired of hearing it from you?
Oh, definitely. Yes, yeah. I think the common phrase is, "Oh God, what's the next thing? What's the next thing we're not going to be able to use, or what's going to be the next problem?"
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because that's what I get. I've been going down this rabbit hole for about 12 months of, microplastics and toxic chemicals. And I actually work in a chemical environment. I work for a large chemical manufacturer, and where I work, I make plastics. My company makes plastics. And so the more I've been learning about this stuff, every time I bring it up, my family just gets sick of me hearing, and they don't want to hear it anymore. So it's like, I don't even want to talk about it. Like, how come we don't need to cook in this, John? Like, isn't this? So anyway, I was curious, like, how do you navigate those conversations, or do you even bring it up anymore?
No, I do. I can't not. I think it's such a big problem. It's difficult, especially when you're reading about it and listening to it all the time. It's really difficult to not talk about it all the time as well. But quite often, I don't know. I always think it's not really down to the individual to change too much. I sort of feel like a lot of the blame is with like the big industry and the governments and things like that. I think, yeah, I don't know. I feel like that makes people feel a bit better. That I'm not saying it's their fault. It's not any individual's fault. It's the fact that we shouldn't be being exposed to these chemicals.
Yeah. So how long have you been studying? Or I guess, what is your actual field of study?
Well, my background is all chemistry. So I did a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and I did my PhD all in chemistry in the UK. And then I started at the Marine Conservation Society in 2019. And even being a chemist, the first time I heard of these forever chemicals was when I started at the Marine Conservation Society. I'd not really heard anything about them in like my chemistry world. I'd only ever heard about them when I started in a more environmental job. So yeah, I've my background is more like traditionally chemistry, but then yeah, the last few years it's just been working on these forever chemicals, these PFAS.
Okay. And how long have you been at the Marine Conservation Society?
I started in 2019, so yeah, like three and a bit years, three and a
Oh,
half years.
wow. Well, you hit the ground running because you've been quoted in a lot of news articles.
I timed it quite well because I feel like it's kind of coming into the public realm a little bit more, especially this year. It seems to have massively taken off in the last kind of 6 months or so. But I think it's kind of yeah, it's but both have gone in hand with each other. The It's become more of a spoken about topic, and then yeah, obviously not many people work on it in terms of a environmental
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. When you were studying, chemistry and chemicals and, getting your education, did you think that you were going to spend time educating the public about these toxic chemicals?
No, I thought I'd be locked away in a lab for the rest of my life. Yeah, I mean, I've always loved the environment. That was like my other kind of main passion, other than chemistry, was always I've been a scuba diver since I was like 12 years old, and I've always loved the environment and the ocean. And then when I saw that I could link the two up and use my like chemist's brain, but to help the environment, I had to do it.
That's so inspirational. It's like, so at a young age, you just realize like this environment, whatever the environment is, this means a lot to me. You just knew that right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think when I was a kid, like plastics weren't really an issue. Yeah, greenhouse gases were kind of spoken about, but it wasn't a big thing really to kind of look after the environment. And then I wrote a book when I was a kid, just for myself, just in a sort of
Oh,
little diary, but about the sea and about all the animals there and about how ships should slow down so that they didn't harm wildlife. And yeah, so I've always had a bit of a sort of, I don't know, bit of an advocate's kind of role in
yeah.
my life.
No, that's so cool. I didn't think that way when I was little. I was just like probably eat my boogers or something. Yeah, like, I just my brain didn't get I guess become that interested into the environment until a couple of years ago. So that I'm always fascinated because I've talked to a lot of researchers lately, and they have a similar story where like, oh, I just knew. This meant a lot to me, and I wanted to do it for this reasons. And it's just interesting to see what piques people's curiosity. Would you say that our oceans are probably the area that gets impacted the most in our environment when it comes to toxic?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it depends what kind of pollution and the source of the pollution, I guess, because obviously, rivers and other waterways are horrendously affected by some pollution. In some cases, even more so than the ocean. I think the thing with the ocean is it's sort of like the final sink of pollution. So all rivers lead to the ocean, and that's where it's all ending up in the end. So I think that's the thing that makes them quite badly affected. Is that's where everything's kind of going eventually.
No, that's interesting. I'm apologize. I'm trying to turn off my phone here. That way, there's some
Yes.
drama going on in my family with my daughter at school, and yeah,
Oh no,
sorry about that. Anyway,
that's okay.
yeah. So these chemicals, I guess the final destination, no matter where we use them, are always going to be in the ocean or in the waterway of some sort.
If we continue to emit them and we continue to sort of dispose of them or whatever else, I think that's generally the issue. Although I saw some research recently that said these PFAS, these forever chemicals, they're actually being concentrated in sea spray and then being transported back to land.
Hmm.
So they're sort of like increasing the effect on land because they're concentrating all the chemicals back rather than just kind of going to the deep ocean or whatever.
Wow, that's interesting. Is in your experience and all of your research, which country is kind of the most pollutant, I guess, causing the most harm to our environment?
I don't know really. I mean, a lot of my work is focused very much on kind of the UK, and then I do a little bit of looking at the EU and looking at sort of Europe and that area. And then I have spoken to a few people from the US, but again, as it kind of gets further and further away from the UK, I don't have as much involvement. So yeah, I'm not too sure about who's the worst polluter, but I think the problem is it can spread. These chemicals can spread all around the world, and they are
Hmm.
spread all around the world. That it's everybody's problem, even if it is only one country that's doing the polluting. Yeah, they're spreading everywhere.
Well, that's yeah. So that's what something I always think about. It seems, just as an outsider looking in, it seems like the UK and the EU they do a lot of upfront work, like keeping, banning chemicals. It's kind of what it seems like is that companies have to prove their chemicals are not toxic before going to market. And in the US, it's kind of opposite. They just go to market, and if something happens, then they ban it. So from an outsider looking in, it seems like the EU and the UK are leading the pack when it comes to protecting human health and the environment. I don't know if that's something that you kind of see too.
The EU definitely far further ahead. And obviously with Brexit, we've now kind of left and we're in charge of our own chemicals laws now. And I mean, the EU, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, submitted, or five European countries submitted a proposal to ban all PFAS.
Mm.
So they are, they're really taking it a lot further. The US is obviously it's more. I don't know the inner workings of the US system, but I know a few US states have put in place or are putting in place some big bans, and they're going further than the UK as well. I think Maine and Vermont and a few others
Yeah.
are really pushing the bans forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and it's probably just because my Google newsfeed is being curated because I've been looking at PFAS and like toxic chemicals and microplastic stuff. But it seems like California and really the northern states are really taking charge because they're testing their waters more and they're finding these toxic chemicals in them. So there is, yeah, I guess from the U.S. perspective, there are single states, but I mean, I don't know anything about legislation or anything like that, but I'd imagine in order to make an impact, it would have to come from federal regulation, and then each country would have to band up together and have similar laws because if U.S. is doing one thing or and they allow one chemical, but the EU is doing something else, then we're really not going to get anywhere. That's what it seems like, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think we are heading in the direction of stopping using these chemicals. I think a lot of industries can see that the writing is on the wall for a lot of them, but it's just how long it takes until we get there because all the time we're sort of adding more and more PFAS to the environment, to our bodies, to wildlife, and we've got this huge burden of persistent pollution that's not going anywhere for generations. So
what was kind of the defining moment when you realized that these chemicals were causing harm? Was there like an aha moment when you're like, crap, I need to do something about this?
I mean, as soon as I found out about them, it just seemed like a terrible thing to have something. We've all seen it with plastic. You can see the plastic stick around for decades, but then when you've got something that's invisible that's sticking around for just as long, I thought, yeah, that cannot be a good thing. But then I heard one. I remember hearing one fact or stat about how every drop of rainwater on Earth contains PFAS, and it would be considered unsafe to drink in some countries, including, in fact, the US drinking level standards for PFAS are lower than what it's found in rainwater in some places. And when I found that out, I yeah, I was completely dumbfounded.
Is that true? Like,
Yeah.
how's that
And
happen? Just from chemical plants, or it gets evaporated and then just comes back down? How's that work?
I mean, it's used in so many different, they're used in so many different things, so many different products, industries, and they, at all kind of stages of their manufacture or use, they can get into the environment, even right down to when you throw out your non-stick pan at the end of its life, that it's still got PFAS on it that then end up in landfill and leach out into the water. And then obviously all the water's constantly being recycled. And yeah, I think it's one of those things that's not got a sort of singular point at which you can pinpoint the problem. It's just because they are so widespread and used in so many things, they just end up in the environment and in us. And yeah.
That's scary because do you think of, the little pictures and the videos of kids like looking up and having their tongues out, drinking rainwater, and I always assumed that was the cleanest source of water. I never heard that before.
I know I always think that as well. It's, you imagine that, yeah, you couldn't get any fresher than drinking water from the sky, but yeah, when it's contaminated with man-made chemicals, it's quite scary.
Yeah. So, PFAS is a really ambiguous term. What does that mean? What do PFAS mean, and what are some household items that we use every day that these chemicals are in?
So it's an acronym. So it stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. But it's just basically a massive family of chemicals. I think the most recent sort of number of members of this family is up in the region of sort of 10, 12,000. But they're a huge family of chemicals that are all very similar. And they are used in everything from, but they're really good at being water resistant and grease resistant. So they're used as a coating on waterproof clothing. They're used in Teflon pans, pizza boxes. They're used in firefighting foam, electronics. Honestly, the list is just massive. Stain resistant coatings on sofas and clothing, and it is a huge list of products.
Wow, and literally everything we use every single day.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it's probably easier to ask what couldn't have PFAS in than what could have PFAS in.
Is it because they're cheap to make, or is it because they're really superior when it comes to their use?
I always say that as a chemist, they are like a spectacular invention. You know, what an amazing chemical to find something that is completely unreactive to anything. You know, they're heat resistant, flame resistant, water resistant. They don't get broken down by anything, which is amazing in one sense. And it's what makes them be able to be used in all those different products. But then that's also where their problems come in because they can't be broken down. They end up sticking around forever in the environment.
Wow. Dang. That's crazy to think about, that we've manufactured something that never breaks down. Is there any way to recycle these? Is there anything being in that, from an innovation standpoint, that's been created that can actually keep these from entering our environment?
So the only way to, well, I'll talk a little bit about some more recent research, but overall, the only way to fully get rid of them is incineration. So heating them to 1,000 degrees centigrade. But obviously, then you have issues with how you're going to capture the air pollution
Yeah.
from that, and that comes with all its own problems. There has been some very, very recent research to suggest that you could break the bonds in the PFAS in a much more environmentally friendly way. So that I think there will be innovation eventually that allows that to happen. I think the problem is, like I said, it's in rainwater all over the earth. It's everywhere on earth, from the North Pole to the South Pole, and we can't collect that pollution to destroy it. So, yeah, it's impossible to get rid of probably what's already there, and then we just kind of need to make sure that we stop adding to it.
Is there a way to kind of sequester that, like similarly to how like sustainable agriculture, can sequester carbon? Is that the only thing that the soil can sequester as carbon, or does that involve all the other toxic chemicals too?
Um, I don't really. I mean, I'd imagine so. Their nature is they are very mobile in water, so
Mm.
that's what makes them quite dangerous in one sense, because they are able to move very easily, and they are captured by like muscle tissue in animals and things like that, but they are very easily able to move around. I don't know of any research actually that's looked into sort of sequestration or anything like that. But again comes the problem, how do you then destroy it
Yeah.
if it is sequestered?
No, and even saying that, I was kind of thinking through, well, then it would be growing in the food, because I've read some articles like that too, where microplastics have been found in, not just on the fruit or in the food or the vegetables, but actually inside of
Yeah.
them. So they've been growing inside, which is crazy to think about, because you think I'll go to organic, farmer's market and I can eat organic food, close to the farm, but it still is laced with microplastics.
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
daunting. It's very daunting to think about. Like, it's kind of, I don't know, my brain. It's I always think about, like, well, we're doomed. Is that kind of what you feel like too, or do you have hope?
um I do get really terrified sometimes, and it does feel like, and especially when you're sort of arguing against companies or against governments, or and there isn't like a sort of agreement of what needs to happen. I think that is really scary. I do have hope. I do think enough people now are aware of it, and it is just growing in awareness, definitely. And I think there is a bit of a change of, like, there's sort of a realization of the issue with persistent chemicals and things that last forever that shouldn't be in the environment. I think there is more of a realization about that, and yeah, it's just a shame that obviously we've had to, especially in the US. I mean, I know there's a lot more sort of the various kind of court cases and things like that are going on with people with horrendous health problems
Mm.
from these chemicals. It's a shame it has to get to that point for something to actually happen.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I guess I can get gloom and doom all day long thinking about it. But for people that don't know, how do these chemicals impact the animals that absorb them? Is there hard evidence from a scientific standpoint of how these chemicals are impacting the animals?
So there is plenty of research going on at the moment. Like I said, the group is so huge of these PFAS, thousands and thousands of them. There isn't evidence for each individual chemical. But some impacts. There was a study done in the UK a couple of years ago that showed so they basically went round, and any otter that they found dead, through natural causes or through roadkill or something like that, they tested them for PFAS, and all of them had PFAS in their blood. And that's not to say that the PFAS killed them, but it just shows how widespread it is. And I always use the sort of analogy, I guess, of when we talk about persistent chemicals, it's the fact that they last forever that's the real problem. Because as we add more and more and more into the environment or into animals, we are moving closer to a point where harm is caused. And I always say that like everything's toxic at a certain level. So, for example, even chocolate's toxic if you eat enough of it. I think it's like a kilogram or something of chocolate is toxic to humans. But as you will get there, you will get to a point where the toxic effect occurs. So with persistent chemicals, with things like PFAS, the more we use them and the more we emit them to the environment, the closer we're getting to a point where harm will occur. We might not even know what that harm is. It's like the CFC example with the chlorofluorocarbons in the refrigerators. And nobody could have predicted that they would cause a hole in the ozone layer. That was just an effect that no one could even have forethought at all. And then, yeah, that's what happened. And there's something similar could happen with PFAS, an effect that we just have no idea that could even happen could potentially be on the cards.
Yeah. When I'm listening to you talk, I'm reminded of some conversations that I've had with some regenerative farmers. And in those discussions, I've asked, how do we move away from factory farming and really adopt regenerative agriculture and get people to support that? And I've always thought that we need some type of government regulation, and we do. And that's, same thing could be applied to the chemicals, but they've all said that consumers have the power. And if consumers shift the way they think and where they shop, then the legislation will follow, which I never really thought about it that way. And I feel like this can be applied here. If, the consumers thought about things that they buy and purchase things from more of a sustainability effort or a sustainability standpoint, then the chemical companies by themselves would have to shift. But I don't know how to. It's so easy to go buy the sunscreen it's cheaper. If you go buy something that's, I don't know, eco-friendly, typically cost a lot more. And, my family, when I talk about, I don't want to cook in nonstick pans or whatever, they have the common response is, oh, we've been doing this for our whole lives. Like I'm fine. Like that's the common response. So I don't know, maybe the newer generation, like the younger generation will come and make changes, but I don't know how to shift the consumer perspective on those.
Yeah, it is a difficult one, and I always say I personally don't think the onus should be on the consumer with this one. I think it is nigh on impossible to work out where you can do the Teflon pan thing, and you can sort of get rid of individual uses of PFAS, but I think they are so widespread and used in so many things that aren't labeled at all. I started looking the other day about cleaning products to see which would or could have PFAS in. And even as a chemist, I can't work that out. I don't have an ingredients list. I don't know. I can't work it out. And I thought as consumers, we shouldn't be in a position where we're trying to work out whether our products have harmful chemicals in them that could stay in us forever. And I just sort of, I feel the bit that consumers can really do is, really make a stand and say, this isn't right. We shouldn't be being exposed to these chemicals. The environment shouldn't be being exposed to these chemicals. We're effectively being used as a living laboratory for all these chemicals. And that shouldn't be how the world works. We had a petition running. It was specifically for the UK, but calling for a ban on these chemicals. And I think the last time I checked, we had 17,000 signatures on it. And I think I said it's like having an army of 17,000 people behind me when I go into meetings with politicians or with industry or anything like that. It's like having 17,000 supporters saying, yes, we agree with what you're saying. And it doesn't matter if the one person across the desk disagrees, because you've got, the voice of the public behind you.
Does that help whenever you're talking to these, the politicians and the legislatures that you've had, support from the general public like this? Do they really care about this, or is it all about the bottom line and how much money they can make?
I think where the power comes with that is the fact that if enough people say enough's enough, they have to listen. You can't just keep ignoring. And I sort of feel like, I don't know if it's the same over in the States, but we went through a phase over here where all cosmetics were labeled with phthalate free or SLS free or sulfate. And I think the only reason that they're labeled like that is because it became a topic of conversation and it became an issue among the general public. And that's sort of what I want to happen with PFAS, that once people start getting outraged about it and saying, this isn't right, I don't want my children's raincoats to be covered in PFAS, then companies will have to act, and then hopefully, governments will act as well.
When it comes to like PFAS in clothing, I was laughing in a conversation that I had with somebody else. I think like the only safe thing to wear is like cotton and wool. So I was like, can you imagine us like just walking around in cotton and wool? Like because it's the only thing that's really safe. Like,
Yeah.
that'd be kind of funny, right? Our fashion would just tank, right?
Oh yeah, be a bit different.
Uh, has there been any concrete studies to see how these chemicals are impacting humans? Like,
Um,
and I know like there's been urine samples of things that like microplastics can be found in the human body. I know we've seen reports like that, but like, do we know really how these chemicals impact the human body?
so I don't work as much on human health. Obviously, I end up reading a lot of stuff about it, just through the nature of my job. But I know, so I don't know if you saw the film Dark Waters.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Too many
that's all
times.
based. Yeah, so that's all based off of one of the PFAS chemicals. It's now banned pretty much worldwide, I think. But that it was some awful illness, ulcerative colitis and thyroid diseases and cancer. Really, really real nasty diseases, all linked to exposure to these chemicals, and sort of some horrendous stories in that film, obviously, of the babies that were born from workers that worked on these chemical plants, and all really horrible stories. But again, there's not the proof for each individual chemical, but I think the way we look at it is they're very, very similar. They may not all act exactly the same, but if one chemical in the group is showing such horrific sort of toxicities, it's likely that the others are going to be similar.
Yeah, and I also read too that these chemical manufacturers, like BPA, for example, I didn't realize there's like, and I'm gonna butcher all this, I don't know them by heart, but I think there's BPA, which is obviously a really bad one, but I think there's like BPS two or something like that. There's BP whatever, right? And a lot of these companies will, once the light is shined on that chemical, they replace it with something else that's equally as toxic.
Yeah. I know it makes you want to scream, doesn't it?
I don't know how it's possible. Like it doesn't.
I know.
I don't like if I was starting a company, selling something, and if it was deemed to be toxic, I imagine I'd be shut down pretty quick. But these companies are so large, and they often have so much power that it's kind of unstoppable, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And it is very complex, and I don't want to make it out like it's really simple to just stop using these chemicals. And I think we can't just stop using them tomorrow. It's not possible. What is possible is stopping using them in the uses that are completely frivolous, completely like unnecessary to our society. But that BPA example, they do the same with PFAS. They ban a couple of them, but just replace them with new ones. And at the speed we're going, I saw a stat the other day that said at the speed we're going at regulating individual PFAS chemicals, we'd be here for like the next million years or something,
Oh,
trying to still ban the others.
gosh, that's sickening. Do you get much support? Well, your organization, do y'all get support from, chemical companies? Do y'all work closely with them and try to come up with innovative solutions?
Not really. My work, so I'm a policy and advocacy manager. So I work primarily on the policy side. So working with sort of governments and our kind of environmental regulators and things like that to try and work towards policy options. We do have meetings with industry, but more downstream users of the chemicals and less the actual chemical producers themselves.
Mm. I mean, are they involved in those discussions at all, though? I mean, I imagine having them involved and kind of upfront and the upfront discussions would be beneficial.
Yeah, no, definitely. They have lots of meetings with government themselves. There's a
Mm.
lot of sort of cross
Cool.
industry and cross organizational working that's carried out.
Mm. I I heard of a treaty, like a global treaty in the UN to end. I don't know if it's necessarily PFAS or more. Was it microplastics? Like it's every country in the UN. There's like a global
Um,
treaty now.
is this the Stockholm Convention, or because
I
that
forget.
that's more on like persistent organic pollutants? So things like polychlorinated biphenyls are banned through that treaty, through that like convention treaty, and that's a sort of yeah
Yeah,
UN wide thing.
yeah.
That's I mean that would be brilliant if all PFAS could be included in that. That would be brilliant.
Well, it kind of made me chuckle because they set this aggressive target of, I think it was 2024, to have a solution to ban. I want to say it was microplastics. Maybe it was just specific microplastic, but I know it was a UN treaty, and it made me chuckle because I can imagine some of these and I know chemical companies were involved too. The manufacturers were involved in this treaty, but it made me laugh because, like I said, I work in corporate America and I go to these big meetings too that we're gonna have an aggressive project and nothing ever gets solved at all. So it makes me laugh. I can imagine what the meeting's like with every different countries and all these manufacturers, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna do this, and nothing really ever gets solved. Like it's just
Yeah.
a talking head, I guess, meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, again, it's going back to what I said a minute ago about it is a difficult thing. You've got on one hand, you've got economies and that all that side of thing. And then on the other hand, you've got human health and environment, and they're both such huge areas of concern, especially at the moment. I do recognize how difficult the world is at the moment just in general. Um, but I think the worst thing is that, not like you said, nothing is happening, and it's sort of everything just is like kind of stagnates, and nothing changes. And I think, yeah, I don't know. It is a complex one, definitely, and there is a lot of things to think about. You can't just say, oh, ban them all right now. There are,
Mm.
I think PFAS are used in things like heart stents and catheters and things, things that are essential for us, but then they're also used in pizza boxes and takeaway containers, and it's like that's not essential at all.
Yeah, I mean, is there? I tend to always. I'm kind of a glass half full kind of guy, so I always like focus on the bad stuff. But is there any good news that has happened recently with PFAS?
I think the best news, again, this is very much like Europe central. I don't, yeah,
Yeah,
I think a
that's
lot of
fine.
stuff is happening in the US as well. But this proposal that's been submitted, I mean, it's yet, well, hopefully next week we'll get sight of it. But it's hopefully going to be a very good proposal to restrict all PFAS from all uses, hopefully, in the EU. So, but yeah, I'm yet to actually see it. So,
So how would that actually work out? Would there be like a plan put in place for by I don't know 2030 we need to end it?
I'm not sure. I'm not
Okay.
sure, to be honest. I think I'd imagine it will take longer. But again, I think the good news is that it's things like this are starting to be suggested. And I was having a look at some US laws the other day, and it, again, by 2030, and I think it was New York and Maine and Vermont, a few others, they're saying to stop using PFAS, and they're already saying PFAS shouldn't be in cosmetics, PFAS shouldn't be in food packaging, and there's lots of like individual action, which I think kind of is promising because it shows that we're moving in the right direction. We're starting to look at it as a whole group of chemicals, not let's ban the next one or the next. We're looking at it as right. Let's stop doing it one by one. This is going to take far too long to ban it chemical by chemical. We'll look at the whole group, and I think it's changes like that that are promising in my eyes, even if they seem very kind of small at the moment. I think we're moving in the right direction.
Is the cosmetic industry the largest consumer of these chemicals?
I really don't know. There was a paper that came out, a research paper that came out a few years ago that kind of showed all the different industries, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I don't think cosmetics was top. I think there's lots of it. It's used in a lot of electronics, and it's used in a lot of cars, and I think there's some huge industries that use these chemicals.
My daughter was going through a breakout a couple of weeks ago. I guess it's been a couple of months ago, and I told her to bring what she was using down, and we looked at the back of the ingredient list, and a lot of the chemicals, or some of the chemicals that were in this face wash, we make at the chemical at the company I work at. And in order to handle some of these chemicals, the workers have to wear PPE, like gloves and like face mask and all this stuff. And that's I feel like there's always a new discovery that happens like once a month, and I'm like, holy shit, like this is crazy. And at that point I was like, wow, like the workers are required to wear these gloves in order to handle this chemical, and then this little 14-year-old girl can just rub it on her face.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
I know it is. I think what always shocks me is sometimes I look at the back of a cosmetics bottle. I can't even pronounce half of what's in the bottle, even as a chemist.
So I'm curious, in your daily life, what are some of the things that you do to avoid some of these toxins?
Again, I always sort of feel like it's not down to me. It's like I said, it's in our drinking water, it's in the food we eat. It's impossible to avoid it. However, just for my own interest, I started trying to see what alternatives were like. So I've always had Teflon pans, and it was just sort of one of those things that I'd just been brought up. That's always what you buy. It's a lot easier to cook on a non-stick pan. And then just recently I needed to get a new one, and I thought, I'll try a stainless steel one, see what it's like. And I think it's fine, to be honest, but you need a bit more oil. But other than that, it's not too bad. But I really do try to not. I think it's important as well to not put pressure on myself or other people to change, just because I think it can get a bit. I don't know. It can get a bit much sometimes. Yeah. It's a bit overwhelming when, you remove it from a couple of things, and then you think, well, I'm still drinking it. I'm still wearing it. I can't. I think it's such a big, complex topic, and it can be a bit too overwhelming, I think. So, I'm sorry. It's probably
you're being too nice, Francesca. You're being too nice. We just transitioned away from nonstick pans recently, and the first time we cooked in them was awful. I was like, okay, maybe we should go back to, like, we still had the nonstick pans in the corner. We hadn't thrown them out yet. We're like, okay, maybe we should go back, because it was just the eggs were like sticking into it. There's like an art to cook to stainless steel, and we didn't realize that.
Yeah, no, definitely. You don't want half your meal still left at the bottom of your pan.
So what are some other things that your organization's working on?
I mean, we work on all sorts. So it's all areas of marine conservation. From, we have a big fisheries team, a big marine protected areas group working on those sorts of things. And then my team we're called the Clean Seas team, but we do all areas of pollution. So we do plastic, microplastics, microfibers, sewage pollution, and then obviously I do a lot of the chemical stuff. And then we do a lot of work just generally looking at, where the ways pollution get into the ocean, and how to stop it, and how to, what's the best way to prevent that. That's our main sort of goal, is prevent pollution, stop it at source, turn off the tap, stop the pollution getting there in the first place, with all of our work, really.
And the things that you're seeing, are plastics a larger concern in our oceans or the chemicals?
I think plastics are more widely researched, definitely. I think chemicals, it's starting to become more of a topic. I think again, it's the banned, the legacy chemicals like PCBs and things like that, that kind of have the most research done on them in terms of chemicals. But the research that's done on microplastics is humongous. So you have a lot more information there to go at. And I think the chemical pollution topic is still very much in its like infancy, I guess, and it is becoming a lot more researched as the days tick on. But I think just pollution overall. I mean, I think the that planetary boundaries model that you have with the climate change and ocean acidification and all those different sort of bits of the pie chart, novel entities they call it now, but it's all the plastic and chemical man-made pollution, and that is like well outside the safe operating space, even more so compared to climate change. So it's like an issue that's on par with climate change, and it's just not spoken. Plastic pollution is spoken about quite a lot, but chemical pollution really isn't.
Yeah, is that just because we can see the plastic? Like people can see the plastic, and we actually can't see these chemicals in the water?
I think so. I think as well, like, if you say pollution, the first thing that springs to mind is like, plastic or sewage or an oil slick in the North Sea, all those sorts of things, or fluorescent toxic waste. But I don't think you think of these like invisible, seemingly harmless they're chemicals that are in your products. I don't think you'd think of your raincoat containing some harmful chemicals. It's just not something most people consider, I don't think. Even as a chemist, I didn't consider it. So
Yeah. I was watching a YouTube video on your website, and I think you were saying something to the effect of like killer whales being almost pushed to extinction because of, is it directly related to these chemicals?
so this is related to PCBs. These are chemicals that really old industrial chemicals that were banned pretty much worldwide in the 80s, I think. But they've accumulated, again, really persistent. So they just stick around. They're not disappearing anywhere. And they're accumulating in killer whales. And the killer whale population off of the coast of the UK there hasn't had a calf in 20 odd years. And it's just tending towards complete extinction. If they can't have a calf, that's it. That's the end of the population. And I think that's the way it's going. And there's nothing that can be done about it because they've banned the chemicals, but it's too late. You can't.
So not a single calf. There's not a baby swimming around anywhere.
No, not in. I think it's 20, 23, 24 years or something like that specifically for the UK. But
wow.
Yeah, and there's other stories of seal pups up in Scotland being born pre-polluted with these PCBs again, these old legacy chemicals. So they're polluted before they're even born.
Have you read any of Dr. Shana Swan's work?
Yes.
She's amazing.
She's my idol.
Is she really? So she's actually, I just had her on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I told her, I was like, if there was a little while there where my wife was a little concerned, she was like, who's this Shana lady, and why is she making you throw away all your pots and pans? Because she was like, I was like, well, because Dr. Swan wants me, like, anyway. So she was saying that these chemicals can impact children even before they're born. Like they impact their sex organs, their brain makeup. So if it can do that to humans, I imagine it's doing that to the sea life as well.
Yeah. Harbor porpoises and, like I said, seals. The chemicals can pass the placental the membrane, placental membrane, and they can they're in breast milk as well. So all these marine mammals are being fed chemical pollutants through they don't stand a chance of not being polluted.
Francesca, you're going to age too early worrying about all this stuff.
Can you see the grays?
What do you do for fun? Like, what do you do to relax a little bit?
I don't know. I like being outdoors. I was going to say scuba diving, but I've not actually been diving for quite a few years now, pre-COVID, so quite a while. But just being outdoors. I live in the Cotswolds, so I'm blessed with some beautiful countryside around here.
I was imagining your answer to be like, well, I don't go swimming because of the toxic chemical. Just stay in your bubble.
Yeah. No, unfortunately, I don't even live that close to the sea. Well, in English terms, I don't live that close to the sea. I'm sure a lot of Americans would think I was mad because I'm only about 2 hours away. But
do you plan on working on authoring a book or doing anything like that?
I'd love to write a book.
Yeah, I imagine like you being involved in these news articles and media outlets reaching out to you. I imagine it's kind of like shifted the way you think a little bit, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I really like the public outreach side of things. I think because you get a really good reception, I think, even though people are scared, and I'm probably ruined your Friday, but it's nice to have the reception that people are outraged, but then they're glad that you're doing the work that you are doing. So it's yeah, there is a book. So there's an author in the UK called Anna Turns, and she's written a book all about chemical pollution in your home, and I can't remember what it's called now, but I think that's really good because it really puts it to the forefront of like, this is a problem, and it's not just all about plastics, it's about chemicals as well.
Yeah, I have to check that book out. If ordinary people in the public want to get involved with your organization, other than going to the website, how can they follow you? What are some ways that people can get involved?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've got a petition running at the moment for it's called Stop Ocean Poison. So it's all about, stopping chemical pollution. And that is specific to the UK, but just share it online, share it on Twitter. The Marine Conservation Society are quite active on Twitter. I'm somewhat active on Twitter. I try to be more active than I am.
You don't have time for that. You don't have time for that.
But just, tell people, tell your family, tell friends, just talk about PFAS and the problems in the sea. And I think the more people we can get talking about it, the better it will be, the more power we will have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Francesca, I'll let you get back to your Friday. I greatly appreciate your time today, and it's been a fun learning, and I enjoy talking about this stuff. I always learn something new, and I think the work you're doing is very important, so thank you.
No, thank you very much for having me. I always like talking about it.
Absolutely. Well, you have a good day, and I'll send you an email when this one's done and wrapped up and posted. So thank you.
Brilliant. No, thank you.
I appreciate you.
See you later.
Have a good one. Bye.